and whose vote really matters. We all get one vote, but some votes are more important than others. Getting to know the electorate a little better might give us some clues as to how it might be won and lost. The National Centre for Social Research has today named 6 categories of UK voters that map the politics of the electorate. There are Middle Britons, biggest group of voters, about 1 in 5, mostly in the middle ground across the closest to being a typical voter. They're the apolitical centrists, 17% of them, less politically aligned on the right on economic issues, but more centrist on social issues, relatively young and low income. The urban progressives, university-educated professionals leaning to the left on economic issues and liberal on social ones. Then there's the soft left liberals, university-educated, politically engaged, liberal on social issues, more centrist on the economy, though, more likely to vote Green, Lib Dem or Labour. The left-behind patriots, they're patriotic, mostly voted for Brexit, opposed to economic inequality, but conservative in their social outlook. And the well-off traditionalists, highly politically engaged and like to vote, many living in rural South East with socially conservative views. So, which of those do we need to worry about? Well, who better to ask? The Professor Sir John Curtice from the National Centre for Social Research. Hi, John.
Good morning to you, Matt.
I hope that I've managed to surmise those.
I thought you did a brilliant job. I was wondering if I needed to do the interview, actually.
Well, no, so the interesting thing is people are already thinking, oh, am I in that group? Am I in this group?
Exactly.
Obviously, everyone has one vote, John, but which group, I suppose the interesting thing if you're a political party is which group do you have in the bag and who is most up for grabs? So
okay, right. So as you might expect, the Conservative Party have in the bag, very firmly in the bag, what we call the well-off traditionalists. They are pretty right-wing on economic issues, so they don't want more taxation. They're not particularly concerned about inequality. And they respond to some of the socially conservative measures, things like Rishi Sunak's national service proposal and, being tougher on criminals. And they're also a very highly engaged group. So that's the conservative core group. There are then a couple of left-inclined groups over which there's a bit more competition and which are completely dominated by Labour. Group number one, as you might imagine, are the urban progressive. Yes, those are those young middle-class professionals walking up and down the streets of London and some of our university towns. They are left-wing on economic issues. They are liberal on social issues. They're very engaged in politics. Heavily Labour, but these are also the group amongst whom the Greens do best. Oh, and by the way, the SNP pick up some of these group north of the border as well. But there's another group that's more likely to vote for the opposition parties than for the government party. They're the soft left liberals. They're more centrist on economic issues. They are, however, pretty liberal on social issues. And they're also pretty engaged. If you want to get a shorthand way of distinguishing between these two left-wing groups, the open progressives are perhaps the Corbynites, and the soft left liberals are perhaps the Starmerites, although this is also the group amongst whom Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats tend to do best. So those are the 3 core groups. We've then 3 other groups which are much more politically divided, 1, but 2, although they are therefore perhaps the groups where parties might have hopes for gaining votes, they're also, all 3 of them, heavily disengaged groups. They're not terribly interested in politics. They tend not to support a particular party. So we've got a couple of groups, the apolitical centrists. They tend to be a bit to the right on economic issues, in the centre stroke, slightly liberal on social issues. But they're very, very disengaged. They just don't have very strong views at all. And they're quite close, but they're slightly different from the Middle Britons who are on the centre on economic issues, but also tend to be on the centre on liberal issues as well. Both these groups very heavily divided between Labour and Conservative. And then we've got the group which perhaps are the closest to the group where Reform might hope to pick up support and probably have picked up support in recent weeks. And that is the folk who are left-wing on economic issues, which you might think would make them Labour, but they are socially conservative. They're some of those left-behind voters that Sir Keir Starmer has been chasing, but which it's also the attitudinal profile that was always more inclined to vote UKIP, and where now there are signs that Reform are doing well. So that's another group, not very heavily engaged, but again, a different kind of competition from the two simple centrist groups.
And to what extent, John, because, there's a criticism of where we are so far in the campaign, the amount of detail there is on, particularly on tax and spend. Everyone's ruling out things rather than giving any detail.
Indeed.
So if we're trying to work out someone who's centrist on the economy, someone who's more right-wing on the economy or left-wing on the economy, how can we work out what they might do, given that everyone's economic plans basically are not because they're betting on tax and don't worry, spending's all fine. So if you're putting people in these groups, how can we work out where they might go, given we know so little about the tax and spend plans of the two main parties?
Well, the answer to is that insofar as the parties don't come up with clear messages to these voters, quite a lot of them will probably stay at home and they'll end up dividing their support. But I think there's an important underlying point here, Matt, which connects this research with the state of the campaign. Arguably, the fundamental weakness of both the Conservative and the Labour campaign is that indeed they've got lots of detailed policies, but they have very little in the way of a broad synoptic message, whereby they're giving an idea to people of the kind of country that they would want to create. And the truth is that, for example, well-off traditionalists and urban progressives have very different views of the kind of country they want to create. And if you're going to engage the centrists, you again need to give them some idea of the sense of direction in which we are going. And I think the honest truth is at the moment, neither Conservative nor Labour are proving very effective at that. We've had lots of initiatives from the Conservative Party, but the whole seems to be less than the sum of the parts. The Labour Party, perhaps partly because of the fiscal situation, are trying to make very limited promises, but they talk about pragmatic common sense government. That's what Rishi Sunak talked about last night. Well, I guess all voters hope that we will have a pragmatic common sense government. The question is, what more do they have to offer us than that?
John, really good to speak to you and fascinating that. And actually, sometimes it's quite good to refocus our attention on the voters rather than the politicians. Professor John Curtice from the National Centre for Social Research. And you can find more